Okay, so before I get started, I want to give a very big thank you to everybody who helped share my previous video, Guns with History, a response. I think it's very imperative that we get that message out there. There needs to be opposition to this outright deception done by the gun control movement here. Now, the topic on this video, gun violence organizations host a briefing before NRA remarks, and yes, I put the parentheses around the gun violence prevention myself, because I don't believe that that's really what they're for. Alright, but basically this information was posted on AR15.com is where I got it from. Whoever posted it got it from somewhere else. I don't know the exact source, but I'm going to post a link to the AR15.com source. And I know this data comes back from 2005, but a lot of the talking points are still there. So I'm going to continue on with this. I want to address each of these points because some of these points are being used either under a different name still, or they're still being used entirely, but I'm going to go and address these. Closing the gun show loophole, or as they're calling it today, universal background checks. Alright, so basically what they're doing is they want to make it so any private transfer has to go through a background check. Alright, now depending on which bill, which they're pushing for, because the bills differ in degree quite a bit, it's almost unenforceable without registration. I mean, and the level of enforceability varies depending on how they want to determine whether or not the law has been violated based on evidence. First off, there's a beyond a reasonable doubt, and the law is completely unenforceable at that point, and it's pointless to have at that point. That would be, say, me loaning a firearm to a friend, which I've done in the past several times, for hunting, and they're cool with that under the bill, if they are, and the friend gets stopped by the cops and they ask, okay, well, where did the gun come from? Okay, well, we've done their trace. The last 4473 is for this person here. Prove you didn't buy it from, well, we have to prove you didn't buy from them now. Okay, the person's probably going to have to go through court, but at the end of the day, it's going to be beyond a reasonable doubt for a conviction. Second type is preponderance of evidence. And so, okay, well, we can't prove beyond a reasonable doubt that you did it, that you bought a firearm without a background check, and that your friend sold the firearm without a background check, but we're pretty much sure that you did. So, okay. And then there's a guilty till proven innocent, which we all know that's not compatible with a free state, but that's like, okay, well, now that we caught you with this firearm that you said your friend loaned us, and your friend's saying that he loaned you, now you have to prove, you both have to prove that. Alright, so you can see where it comes to, it goes from being unenforceable all the way to just straight up tyrannical. And just completely going against the values of any free society. Immunity for reckless sellers, as they put it. First paragraph, they're talking about the case about the DC sniper and the firearm salesman that was sued over this. Basically, how the DC sniper had one of his guns, he had a firearm that couldn't be accounted for by the FFL, and the FFL had over 200 firearms he couldn't account for. Now, with that information, you might be led to believe that, hey, this is a nefarious act. You know, this guy was clearly selling them or intentionally losing them, you know, and the DC sniper happened to get a hold of it. And it happened to be one of his buyers, under the table buyers. But the fact of the matter is that they don't give a quantifiable time period to where these over what time period these 200 other missing guns came about. That would be the first thing. The second thing is that I don't know the size of the FFL, and again, that's not posted here either. But leads me to believe unquestionable that a lot of FFLs have inventories of over thousands of guns. They sell thousands of guns a year. So is it far-fetched to believe that a gun's going to come up missing here, a gun's going to come up missing there? Of course not. You know? I mean, now, was this over a period of a month, a year, a decade, 2 decades, half a century? Well, you know, again, the timeline, you know, can put some perspective on this here. But given that it wasn't put there, I'm going to bet that if they did put the timeline, given the gun control movement's track record with me, I'm going to be willing to bet that it was probably reasonable. I'm going to pause this. I got to take a break right quick. So, second paragraph. 2 New Jersey officers sued an FFL for, quote, irresponsibly selling 12 handguns to a gun trafficker for thousands of dollars in cash. Okay. So, few things that are not mentioned here. First being, what state was this in? Second, what time period, over what time period were all 12 of these handguns sold? Third, what was the quantifiable amount of cash sold? Not just thousands of dollars, but an actual number. First off, it was in New Jersey, and he was, again, as I said, he was selling the guns in the gun store. The authorities couldn't prove criminal intent. So this is pretty telling as is right here. If it was in New Jersey, it was a 1 gun a month deal. So this would have to be over at least 12 months. He paid cash. A lot of people still do pay cash for guns. I paid cash for guns at a gun store. Thousands of dollars. Well, 12 handguns, it's not too hard to believe that buying them over the counter for their standard price, you're going to pay thousands of dollars. This Walther P99 cost me $600 after tax, but for simplicity, we're going to say $500 even after tax. 500 by 12 is 6,000. That's thousands of dollars. So it's not near as nefarious as they're making it out to sound. And without any more facts, they can't prove it is any more nefarious. Third paragraph goes into lawsuits. Well, guess what? I believe a lot of junk lawsuits need to be curtailed. And you know what? If this is the case, good on the gun industry. But you know what? There are a lot of people in the gun control movement that abuse litigation just to get their way. They're like, well, we can't pass a law, so we're going to sue the gun manufacturers and the gun sellers out of business. And that's their mentality. Third, I can go either way with this, whether or not they're being honest about it or whether or not they're being dishonest about it. First, if they're being honest about it, you know, it basically blocks our administrative proceedings, which basically takes out the criminal court to revoke an FFL. Which, you know what, I don't agree with using administrative proceedings. If you've ever purchase as many handguns or as many guns as I have over the years, and I filled out a lot of 4473 forms. Some FFLs get pretty anal with that because the agents that are investigating them get pretty anal with that. Like, give you an example, state of residence. There have been a few times I've abbreviated with a TX, which is a standard procedure, and FFL has handed me a new form, told me to fill out again, except write out the state of residence, because the BATFE agent investigating did not like the TX. They were suspected the TX. You know, so again, if it goes down to crossing the T's, dotting the I's, that's not an indicator of criminal intent. That's just an indicator of paperwork. And if they're being dishonest with it, like the T. Hart Amendment, they said the gun control advocates are saying that it prohibited law enforcement from using trace data. Not true. It prohibited people from using trace data for junk lawsuits. It did not prohibit law enforcement from using it to investigate crimes. Next paragraph. Castle Doctrine, basically, is what they're talking about. First in this one, obviously, you know, they have a problem with it being used outside the home. Well, you know, it's not like, you know, you haven't been in a life-threatening situation in public, well, it's not like people haven't been in a life-threatening situation in public places. And second, most firearms instructors advise gun owners to flee rather than confronting an attacker whenever safely possible. Keyword, whenever safely possible. And by the way, sometimes you can't always flee whenever safely possible, or sometimes in hindsight you could have fled, but you had the best intentions when defending yourself, and you did what was necessary to defend yourself. I don't think somebody should go to jail for manslaughter if they did everything right, and, you know, of course, they had to make that heat of the moment decision, and ended up later in hindsight they could have probably fled. I don't believe in putting people in jail for that, and I don't think that makes somebody a criminal. Apparently the gun lobby, or the gun control lobby, does. And the case they brought, facts, James, go back here a second, James Loden, an adult, whose adult son shot another man in the leg in the Sartasta, Florida, after the man allegedly tried to run him over with a car. Well, guess what? That's justification for deadly force. And he said his son would not have been quite so anxious to pull the gun if it had not been for Florida's new law. Alright, obviously they're probably taking the guy out of context, but you know what? People shouldn't have to feel anxious about what the law is going to say if they're defending themselves. You know, I would rather somebody be alive and had to shoot somebody in self-defense than to be dead because they were so anxious about what the court was going to say in hindsight. And no, it didn't create a confusing situation. It just added a little bit more clarity. It said, hey, you know what? If there's somebody who's threatening your life, you're allowed to use deadly force to protect your life. Clarified it. Made the law simpler and more clear to understand. It did not create a confusing situation. And to refute the last sentence on there, no, it doesn't give license to people to just pull out a gun and shoot others just to resolve disputes. You have to be threatened first. Your life has to be in danger first before you can pull out that gun. All that law says is that you don't have to retreat before drawing your firearm. You don't have to try to retreat. I'm going to take a quick break right here. Okay. So, again, terrorists and guns, they're saying that government accountability offices reported dozens of individuals over a 4-month period were able to purchase guns even though they were on the terrorist watch list. I shouldn't say terrorist watch list. Alright, how many people know what that's composed of? How many people know how you get on that watch list? Well, I don't know how you get on that watch list. I don't know who it's composed of. But there's no due process involved. There are a lot of people who try to get on planes and find out that they're on that watch list. I mean, hell, they've even had a kid that was on that list because his name sounded similar to a known terrorist who wasn't able to get on a plane. And for those of you who wonder, I don't believe in just depriving people of their liberty without at least going through some sort of due process through the court of law. It's one of the principles that's made our nation great. You know, it's part of the rule of law that before you should be deprived of liberty, you know, you should at least have some due process beforehand. But here we have it. These people want to take an already a gross infringement on our freedom and expand it to the purchasing of firearms. And I just can't support that. Now, I've been told that, yes, in even my home state of Texas, you can purchase as many guns as you want. However, you purchase more than 3 in a month, you're supposedly on a watch list. Well, if that's the case, I'm on a watch list. Again, this, quote, terror gap bill was proposed after the first Fort Hood shooting. However, what they didn't tell you was that Nidal Hasan was a commissioned officer at the time. To be a commissioned officer, you have to have at minimum a secret security clearance. The guy's able to get a secret security clearance, join the United States Army, get a commission as an officer, and make it up to the ranks of major. And you think that he was somehow on a watch list? That he's somehow able to purchase a gun? I mean, and by the way, before that shooting, he was set to go overseas. Guess what they would have been giving him if he'd been going overseas? Probably a select fire rifle. You know, which you can't readily pick up in gun stores. Now, and obviously there's the problem of abuse. I mean, is it too far-fetched to believe after observing the gun control movement that they would abuse this just to reduce the number of gun owners or to go after political enemies? I don't think so. You know? And by the way, to the answer to that question at the end, I do believe that people on that list should be able to buy. I think, you know, you should have due process before you deprive somebody of a basic right. But again, as you will find out about these gun control advocates, is that they either don't believe in basic rights or they don't believe owning a firearm is a basic right. Or both. And right here says it all. Now, the meme says explain the difference. And I gotta say, the person who made this meme was a fucking moron. No, I take that back. I don't want to insult morons here by comparing them to this asshole who made this meme. But I'll answer a stupid little fucking question here. First, person on the right's holding a Bible and an AR-15. She's doing it because she believes in the right to have both. She believes in the right to freedom of religion and the right to keep and bear arms. Did I say right? I meant left. This person on the left, no, I meant right. this person on the left is somebody who is an actual terrorist who has engaged in violent terrorist activities. You see the difference? There is a difference there. See, has not committed any political violence. Has not. Has. I mean, and anybody who believes this, you know what, I'm not going to insult morons. But anybody believes that this, you know, is an actual honest question or an actual honest meme, you're the exact fucking reason why I don't want this fucking stupid, quote, closing of the terror gap. Idiot. And idiots, by the way, I'm not meaning to insult you. I'm going to take a quick break here. More firearms in Washington, D.C. To quote what they say here, the NRA believes that armed citizens will help to reduce violent crime, particularly in Washington, D.C., where the NRA has made repealing local restrictions on gun ownership a top legislative priority. Then why doesn't it advocate guns in Capitol buildings and other government buildings? Okay, you know what? The last line, if they don't advocate, if they're against the gun-free zones there, I disagree with them on this issue, but it doesn't mean that I don't agree with them on the other issue. But this is even more telling in the mentality of the gun controller, into the gun control movement. Because they'll tell you, well, we're just advocating for some common sense measures. But here, after the 2008 decision in Heller, they came from an outright ban to some pretty draconian gun laws. You know, all the DC versus Heller case said was that, well, you just can't have an outright ban. And the gun control advocates whined about that. They whined about the repeal of the handguns ban via Supreme Court. Which just goes to show you the mentality there. So, yeah, again, you know, you're really not looking to take our guns away. You know, there's just not a restriction all the way up to a ban that you just don't support. You know? So, again, this right here, it's just blatantly obvious evidence. You know, they're sitting there, the gun control advocate will sit there and argue, well, we don't believe in throwing more guns onto a situation. Bitch, you've already disarmed all the law-abiding citizens with your draconian gun laws. It didn't stop criminals from getting guns. All the NRA is really advocating here is to let the law-abiding citizens have guns to protect themselves. Something that you took away from the law-abiding citizens, which you assured us that you weren't really after, that none of your measures should affect the law-abiding citizens. Well, unless, of course, the law-abiding citizens actually want to own firearms. You know, it's just like after Sandy Hook or any other mass shooting in a gun-free zone. You know, you'll have somebody from the Brady campaign like Dan Gross or Piers Morgan sitting there saying, well, the answer is not more guns, it's less guns. Or, we shouldn't really throw more guns onto the situation. Okay, dipshit. And I'm not meaning to insult dipshits here. But okay, dipshit. You know, you already had your way, time and time again. The only people who had guns there were criminals. You know, who disobeyed and just flat out ignored or even took advantage of your stupid gun laws. So moving on. I don't know how they got in there. But no, seriously, it does highlight the mentality of the gun control advocate, doesn't it? Oh, well, we don't want to take away your guns. We just want to make it impossible for you to have one. Political matters. Okay. The NRA claimed the re-election of George Bush was a victory for the NRA. Well, guess what? The only two candidates that were going to get elected in that 2004 election was George Bush and John Kerry. And at least George Bush wasn't actively campaigning for the renewed assault weapons ban or the closing of the gun show loophole. It would have just been something he'd signed if it came across his desk. Kerry, on the other hand, would have been pushed for it, and gun control advocates would have taken Kerry's sign as a victory. You know, and don't get me wrong, you know, in this case between Kerry and Bush, I would have honestly rather preferred Michael Badnarik win, but realistically that wasn't going to happen. Unfortunately, Michael Badnarik, the Libertarian Party candidate of that election, just didn't have the same backing that John Kerry and George Bush had. And again, NRA convention. Alright, basically they decided to not have the convention in Columbus, Ohio, after Columbus, Ohio passed, they call it reasonable restrictions. They have no business using that word, reasonable restrictions. But basically they did something the NRA was opposed to and put that assault weapons ban through in the city of Columbus, Ohio. The NRA said, okay, you know what, this is really not a city that's representative of our views, and we really shouldn't hold our convention there. You know, it's a funny thing is that they are saying now, oh, you reneged on a promise. Well, let me tell you something. With the gun control lobby, you're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't. After Columbine, the NRA had a convention in Colorado 11 days later under some bylaws to hold their status as the organization they were. They had to give their members 10 days notification before canceling. You know, it was 11 days when Columbine happened. They didn't have enough time to send out the notifications. So they still had the meeting anyway. And fucking people like Michael Moore twisted that into being something it wasn't. Same for all the other gun control advos. So again, you're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't with the gun control movement. And speaking of which, you know what? Gun control advocates boycott businesses that don't fucking cater to their demands. So why should the NRA be any different? What moral high ground do you have in this one? Gun control lobby. And this is a bonus. Put this cartoon on here. He says, I need one of these to feel safe. Alright, you know, first off, let me address this right now. You know, you gun control advocates have been talking about banning guns for your need to feel safe, so don't project that need to feel safe onto us. We're saying that we don't want to be restricted from carrying tools that can be used to protect yourself. We're not talking about feeling safe here. And then he goes, because the government's out to get me. Okay, well, first off, that's only a small minority of firearms freedom advocates that believe it. And really you're strawmanning even that argument. The idea behind the Second Amendment was that the people could have some bit of force, that the government would not have a monopoly on the weapons. the idea behind the Second Amendment was so people could have the same weapons as the infantry does, which obviously we're restricted from that in our modern day age. Even this AR-15 is still not the same as your standard infantryman's M16 or M4. But I'm not advocating for an overthrow of the government or anything like this. The point behind this message is that if you're so willing to vote away your freedoms out of fear, then you've already lost your freedoms. Hell, this guy's got a better chance than you do of maintaining your freedoms, because you're so willing and sometimes enthusiastic about voting them away. And the fact of the matter is that if you're so willing to vote this away just out of fear that somebody's going to use one of these things to kill your kids, you know, you've already lost. Because the government can say anything, you know, to tweak that fear to get you to vote for anything you want. You're going to be the very first people that just blindly step on the train, proverbially speaking. If you're willing to vote this away, you've already lost. End of story. Here's the link right here. I'm going to post it down in the discussion section. Y'all take her easy.